Hello and welcome back to the Commodities Institute podcast. I'm Emily Costa and today is Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. We begin today in the metals markets, where a significant shift in Chinese policy is sending ripples through the copper supply chain. Beijing is set to halt all exports of sulfuric acid starting in May. This is a massive deal because sulfuric acid is a critical byproduct of copper smelting. For the past year, high prices for this chemical actually helped smelters stay profitable, even as the fees they charge to refine copper concentrate, known as treatment charges, collapsed to historic lows. In fact, spot treatment charges recently hit a record low of -$77 a tonne. Now, with an export ban looming to protect domestic fertilizer supplies, that safety net is disappearing. Industry insiders expect Chinese smelters will have to finally blink and trim their production or bring forward planned maintenance. Meanwhile, over in the United States, the massive copper stockpile on the Commodities exchange, which sits at over 530,000 metric tons, is expected to start thinning out. The head of Orubis, Toralf Haag, notes that while the war has caused some downturn in the automotive sector, massive demand from the construction of 1,000 new data centers globally is providing a sturdy floor for the red metal. Shifting our focus to the energy sector, the geopolitical situation remains incredibly tense. We are seeing the first full day of the United States blockade on vessels calling at Iranian ports. While US Central Command reports that no ships made it past the blockade in the first 24 hours, shipping data shows that the Strait of Hormuz hasn't completely gone quiet. At least 8 ships, including 3 Iran-linked tankers not heading to Iranian ports, managed to cross the waterway. One notable transit was the Rich Starry, a Chinese-owned tanker carrying 250,000 barrels of methanol. The pressure from Washington is only intensifying. We've learned today that the Treasury Department will not renew a 30-day waiver on Iranian oil at sea that expires this week. They also quietly let a similar waiver on Russian oil expire over the weekend. This marks a definitive end to the administration's efforts to use waivers to keep global energy prices down. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been very clear, sending letters to banks in China, Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman, warning them to identify and stop any illicit activity linked to Tehran. With China currently buying more than 90% of Iran's oil, for global trade relations couldn't be higher. This energy volatility is having a fascinating double-edged sword effect on agriculture, particularly cotton. On one hand, the 30% surge in oil prices since the conflict began has made synthetic fibers like polyester significantly more expensive to produce. This has pushed cotton futures up by 16% as textile mills look to substitute natural fibers for more expensive synthetics. However, there's a catch. Analysts warn that if high oil prices continue to fuel global inflation, consumer spending on clothing might dry up entirely. Furthermore, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has forced regional fertilizer plants to shut down. As North American farmers begin their planting season, many are weighing whether to move away from fertilizer-intensive crops like cotton in favor of soybeans. Despite these global headwinds, there is some positive news regarding supply from South America. Brazil's National Crop Agency, CONAB, has hiked its soybean output forecast to a record 179 million metric tons. Total grain output in Brazil is now projected to hit over 356 million tons. However, getting those grains to market remains a challenge elsewhere. In Argentina, grain ports in Bahia Blanca and Necochea were paralyzed today by trucker protests. These drivers are pushing for higher transport fees because diesel prices have jumped nearly 30% this year, making it nearly impossible for them to cover their costs. Finally, we look at how Europe is attempting to structurally break away from this cycle of energy shocks. A draft document from the European Commission reveals an ambitious plan to reduce electricity taxes and accelerate the shift toward clean technology. The goal is to make electricity cheaper than fossil fuels by law, protecting consumers from the spiraling gas prices that have remained 35% above pre-war levels. Across the Atlantic, US utilities are also bracing for a massive investment cycle. Research shows that electric utilities plan to spend up to $1.5 trillion on power lines and infrastructure through 2330. While intended to handle rising demand and an aging grid, it's sparking serious concerns about the affordability of power bills for American households in the years to come. It's a complex web of policy, conflict, and supply chain shifts, but the underlying theme is clear. The era of cheap energy and predictable transit is currently on hold. If you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Find us online at commoditiesinstitute.com.